If you're minivan shopping in America and you want to reduce your carbon footprint, at the moment you have two options. You have this Toyota Sienna, which is a full hybrid, and you have the Chrysler Pacifica, which is a plug-in hybrid. Although later this year, we should be seeing the new Volkswagen ID Buzz. But the ID Buzz is a little bit different than the average American minivan. And by American minivan, I mean the format that we see in the Sienna, the Odyssey, the Kia Carnival, and of course the Chrysler Pacifica. One interesting feature of North America-focused minivans, those minivans that I just mentioned earlier, versus minivans that were designed in Europe for the European audience or in Asia for the Asian customer, tends to be the fact that the third row in these vehicles is wider, whether we're talking about the Sienna, the Pacifica, the Odyssey, etc. These all have three-person third rows, and most of those minivans outside of North America have a third row that's several inches narrower. You can fit a 4x8 sheet of plywood basically inside any modern American market minivan at this moment, and that's not necessarily true of the upcoming ID Buzz or some of the other minivans that we're likely going to be seeing electrified around the world. At this point, some of you might be wondering, why is the Sienna Hybrid on EV Buyer's Guide? It's not a full EV. Well, it is electrified, and I firmly believe that as we transition to a fully electric future, vehicles like the Sienna and its plug-in hybrid counterpart from Chrysler, the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, certainly still have a place at the moment, especially in light of limited resources for building full electric vehicles. We don't currently have the worldwide resources to make everything an EV, including the Sienna, so this is a decent stopgap that will certainly have a carbon reduction impact. And there is a certain amount of logic to say that rather than building one full EV with a battery pack that's about 130 kilowatt hours, you could build 80 of these vehicles, or about 8 of the Pacifica plug-in hybrids, and those could have a greater environmental impact than just building that one EV. Moving, for instance, 80 people from a 20 mile per gallon average Honda Odyssey into a 35 mile per gallon Toyota Sienna or a 36 mile per gallon Toyota Sienna, that has a greater impact than moving one person from an Odyssey into a Rivian R1S, which has more or less about the same kind of internal capacity as we find in this particular minivan. These also cost an awful lot less, and the fact of the matter is some people aren't ready for that full electric future, so for them, vehicles like this and like the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, they make a bit of sense right now, but I'm really eager to see what Volkswagen has up their sleeve for the new ID Buzz. If you want to go cold turkey and you want to go completely electric, that is the vehicle you should wait for. 3 key things to know about the Sienna. This does not have a non-hybrid version in North America, so all models are hybrids. Next thing, 8 seats are available in the Sienna. You can get this as a 7 or an 8-passenger minivan. The 8-passenger part is key because there really are not very many 8-passenger electrified vehicles around the world of any description, and at the moment in the United States, there is no 8-passenger full EV. So if you need to seat 8 and you want to lower your carbon footprint, this is basically going to be your only option. The Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid deletes the 8th seat in order to help keep its curb weight and its payload in the right range, so no 8-seat version if you get the plug-in hybrid, 7 seats only in that model. The last thing to know is that the Sienna can also be had with Toyota's all-wheel drive electric rear axle to give you added traction on snow and on ice. It's not as capable as a mechanical all-wheel drive system, but this is the same sort of thing that was seen spreading across Toyota's hybrid lineup. If you talk to minivan owners, many of them will tell you that they love the size and the shape of their minivans. And again, I'm specifically talking about North American minivans, Voyager, Pacifica, Carnival, Odyssey, and of course the Sienna. They love the boxiness, the fact that the roofline is very square, so you can put a lot of cargo up there if you want to. The fact that we have a pretty boxy rear end, which improves cargo practicality and third row room as well. They love the low lift in height and the fact that we have sliding doors. These are all very practical, family-focused features. And you'll notice that because of the sliding doors, we have a very low load floor, something that may or may not be possible when we take a look at some of the newer crop of more minivan-like electric vehicles coming soon. We just don't know too many details about that, but I wouldn't be surprised if the step in height ended up increasing just a little bit as we see in some similar vehicles. Also interesting, all the North American minivans are very close to one another in size. This is just over 204 inches long, which is definitely longer than the average 3-row crossover. In fact, in terms of general dimensions, minivans tend to be an awful lot closer to full-size SUVs than mid-size 3-row crossovers, and all of that goes into interior room because you can see we have a fairly short hood, and everything has been pushed very far forward or far rearward in order to give you that sense of space and capacity that we typically find in a minivan. Out back, Toyota gives us these sort of fishtail styled LED taillights. You can see the sort of fin thing going on here. We then have incandescent turn signal and backup lights there, and a very large and practical hatch. You'll also see that once the hatch is open, we have another distinctive minivan feature right now. And that is a large cargo area behind the third row. Back here we have nearly triple the kind of cargo capacity that we find in a Tesla Model X, one of the largest three-row crossovers available. And you'll notice that the third row seats fold flat into the floor because that cargo well is very, very deep. So you can either fold the seat into the floor or you can stack up luggage there behind the third row. Under the hood, we find a familiar sight if you've seen any of Toyota's hybrids recently. This is a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine. Under this hood, the engine itself produces 189 horsepower. When combined with the two motor generator units on this side of the engine bay, that bumps things up to 245 horsepower combined. So the output is more similar to the Highlander than the RAV4. Although obviously once the battery is depleted if you're climbing a long hill, all you will have left is the 189 horsepower produced by the gasoline engine over there on that side. In order to improve efficiency, this is running on a modified Otto cycle that's frequently called the Atkinson cycle. Now, a lot of folks have described this as having a CVT. That is not technically true. On this side of the engine bay, we have two motor generator units and a single planetary gear set. These sort of act like a transmission, I guess you could say. That's the truest way to describe this. If you want to go backwards, it simply spins one of the motor generator units backwards and drives the car in electric-only mode. This cannot use the gasoline engine to mechanically power the vehicle in reverse. It has to use that motor generator unit. To go forward, some of the energy is being transferred mechanically through that planetary gear set to the wheels, but a large portion of the energy is also going from one motor generator unit to the other. This is a very similar system to what we see in most Ford hybrids like the Escape and of course the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. Fuel economy ranges from 35 to 36 mpg according to the EPA, depending on whether you get the front-wheel drive model or the all-wheel drive model. The all-wheel drive system is not a mechanical all-wheel drive system like the previous generation Sienna. Instead, it's done by a 54 horsepower electric motor that's in the rear. That produces up to 89 pound-feet of torque. You'll notice that the rear electric motor available in the Sienna is not as powerful as other e-axle systems that are out there, but 54 horsepower will still give you a little bit of sure-footed traction in winter weather, slippery weather, etc. The Sienna does not have a completely flat floor because the battery is located right here under the passenger seat and under the driver's seat. It stretches from one side to the other. That's why you see the cooling grate there. And then we have a little bit of a raised floor right there in that center console area. Why does Toyota still use nickel metal hydride packs in their hybrids? This is a question I get asked all the time. The first reason is likely cost. Nickel metal packs are cheaper than lithium-ion batteries. That makes the vehicle cheaper to build and, of course, cheaper for you to buy. The second reason that a lot of folks don't think about is that it wouldn't necessarily result in much of a weight savings, if at all, in a vehicle like the Sienna or the average full hybrid. This is a fairly small battery pack in terms of capacity. It's under 2 kilowatt hours. Toyota doesn't give us the exact details on the battery pack. But the big thing to know about the battery under the front seats in this vehicle is that it is still air-cooled. And air-cooled systems are cheaper to build, again, and they're also easy to fix if something goes wrong. They also are lighter than a liquid-cooled system, and likely they would need to liquid-cool the battery as we see in Ford hybrids that use lithium-ion packs. The coolant loops, the coolant pump, etc., all of that adds weight and complexity to the vehicle that we just don't see in this battery pack, so most likely the curb weight of the vehicle would be unchanged if they went to a lithium pack. Now, the big advantage to lithium batteries is the size of them. So the battery pack would be smaller, it might be easier to place in the vehicle, but as long as you design the vehicle around this big battery pack, things are just fine. Speaking in very general terms, the last logical reason for a nickel metal pack is that they generally have better cold weather performance than lithium ion packs. So in colder weather, this pack does not need a heater blanket. It does not need to be actively heated by that coolant loop in the vehicle. It's just fine being air cooled on the inside of the car. Today I'm driving the XSE trim of the Sienna, which is theoretically the sporty styled version. We get a 4-way power lumbar support here for the driver, multi-way adjustable driver seat with a tilting seat bottom cushion, manually tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion. I do find the seats in the Chrysler Pacifica to be a little bit more comfortable, but as we see in many minivans, the seat bottom cushion is a little bit short for me. This seems to definitely be focused on people that maybe are a little bit shorter than I am, although taller folks shouldn't have too much of a problem because there is plenty of headroom in here and plenty of legroom. This front seat can move all the way back, giving taller drivers a really great driving position as long as you don't mind that seat bottom cushion being a little bit short. Now let's talk about the Sienna's somewhat controversial second row. The reason this seat is controversial is that it does not come out of the minivan at all. This is the only minivan in America where the second row seats do not come out of the vehicle or fold flat into the floor. If you're looking at the Pacifica Hybrid, you should know that they come out rather than going into the floor because the floor is where that big 16 kilowatt hour battery pack is located. Instead of that, they do collapse. You can see the seat bottom cushion flips up and then they fold forward in order to give you a larger space over here to climb into the third row. You can, of course, put the seat just in this position if a child seat was still in here and then access the third row via this area over there, but it is a bit of a tight squeeze. And if you have a rear-facing child seat, it's unlikely that you're going to be able able to move this seat far enough forward in order to get back there through the rear. I recently had some family friends visiting. They had an 11-week-old daughter, and we definitely played around with the seat arrangement and her rear-facing child seat, and there was just no way to get back there into the rear if that child seat was in place. But I have to say that this sliding mechanism does make it really easy to get the kid in and out of the vehicle, which I had to do several times. So you can actually put it back there in a more appropriate position for crash safety, because those rear-facing seats can be quite large. Still plenty of room for that third row person there. But then when it comes time to remove the child from the vehicle, you can scoot it as far forward as you want for easier access through that door. And then you can scoot this other seat all the way backwards. That way someone else can come in from the other side of the vehicle and assist you if needed. Due to aerodynamic concerns, there are not very many electric vehicles on the horizon with a third row this large and accommodating. You can see we have a flat floor back here. The seat bottom cushion is not slammed all the way to the ground. I still have about ½ an inch of headroom if I put my head all the way back there to the headrest, and this seat is in one of its more upright seating positions. Even in the relaxed position, I could actually still have a decent amount of headroom back there. Something like the Rivian R1S, it looks like it's going to have a pretty accommodating third row. I was able to sit back there for a very, very brief time, but I find this rear seat to be more accommodating than what we find in the Model X. The Model X has a very sloping roof profile. In terms of profile, it actually is still shaped like a Model S or a Model 3 or a Model Y or even a Toyota Prius, because that's a very aerodynamic shape, and that really cuts down on third row headroom. Unfortunately, this kind of shape hampers efficiency. Cargo capacity and cargo practicality is the reason you want a minivan over the average three-row crossover, electrified or not. This is the kind of vehicle where if you pack reasonably well, you could fit 6 people and their luggage back here with no problem, 7 people or 8 people as long as they packed lightly. Then we have the added practicality of a little bit of towing capacity and of course that roof rack for additional storage space. Let's take a spin around the interior now. Between the rearview mirror and this standard-sized moonroof, we have a bunch of buttons here. Those relate to the moonroof, the telematics system, as well as the power doors. So the power sliding doors on the side and the power hatch right there. That's a nice touch. We have sliding sun visors for the driver and the front passenger. Again, a pretty standard-sized moonroof. I wish this was a little bit larger. Behind there, we have sort of an interesting dinosaur, a rear seat entertainment system. Let me know if you're interested in that in your next minivan. I think I would rather have iPad holders or tablet holders, something like that. And then behind that rear seat entertainment system, we find the controls for the 4-zone automatic climate control in this vehicle. You'll see we have rear air vents there for the second row and the third row passengers, well-integrated sunshades, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and this vehicle has an imitation leather upholstery. The upper portion of the seat has a really interesting texture to it. It reminds me either of diamonds or perhaps an imitation alligator skin. Let me know what you think about that in the comment section. Moving over to the front doors, we have tons of storage cubbies everywhere. This is something that we haven't seen in too many EVs, but it's something that minivans have excelled at for decades. Couple bottle holders down there at the bottom, cup holders, whatever you want to call them. Storage areas right there in the middle. A big storage tray that spans across the dashboard is definitely an interesting hallmark here in this Sienna. There's a Qi wireless charging mat in the middle, but definitely enough room for some of those larger smartphones over there on that side. We then have a somewhat small appearing touchscreen infotainment system here in the middle of the dashboard. I wish the bezel was a little bit smaller with the smaller touchscreen. It would make it look a little bit, just a little bit better integrated here. Physical buttons over here on the side for home, menu, things like that, and then the touchscreen in the middle, which as you can see supports smartphone integration. We have a 4-zone automatic climate control system in the Sienna. That's a really nice touch here. Heated seats with these buttons right here, and then you control the rear zones by toggling this little toggle, and then you can use the rest of the controls for those rear zones. We have a pretty traditional shifter here, USB input for your smartphone. I do wish that had been secreted away a little bit better, because under the center console there is a truly massive storage area there. Even though we don't have a completely flat floor, it's almost flat, and you could fit diaper bags or other large items right there under this floating center console. Now it is not symmetric. There's actually a bump under there for this shifter, and then there's a little bit more room over here on the passenger side. 2 more large cup holders there. This area you can use to prop up your smartphone in. So if you wanted to stuff your smartphone in right like that, you could do that. We have a button for the brake hold button, the EV mode, drive mode buttons there. More cup holders behind this little panel, and another area where you can prop up smartphones, small tablets. Between the front seats, we have 2 padded armrests, a very large storage area that opens to the side right like that. You can see there's tons of stuff hiding in there. Behind that, we have USB charge-only ports, 2 of them. 2 cup holders, you can see bottles in them right down there. And then this is a bag storage hook or a purse hook, whatever you want to call that, so that we can store your items right there behind the front seats. On the driver's side, we find an instrument cluster that's pretty familiar if you've driven any recent Toyota hybrid. There's a Charge Eco power gauge over here on the left side, speedometer on the right side, and then a small color multifunction display in the middle that gives you things like your trip computer readouts, audio information, safety information, etc. Moving out from there, we have one of Toyota's newer steering wheel designs. It's a 3-spoke design, so this is not a split bottom spoke. That's actually completely solid there. Over here on this side, we find the controls for that multifunction LCD instrument cluster and the volume up-down. Over here on this side, we find the controls for the standard adaptive cruise control system, lane centering system, track forward, backward, and mode button. On the driver's side, we have an AC 120 volt on-off switch. The onboard 1500 watt AC inverter is one of the more powerful ones in any vehicle in North America outside of select pickup trucks and some new EVs out there. This allows you to power things like a microwave, a refrigerator, or perhaps even a small air conditioning unit right back here through this plug. To help power game consoles or things like that, we also have a 120 volt inverter outlet just above the cup holders for the second row passengers right by that HDMI port. We have bottle holders back there in the rear seats, and then some storage right there in those sliding doors. There's a better view of that rear seat entertainment system, and then of course the 4-zone automatic climate controls. In my acceleration testing, it took 8.4 seconds for the Sienna to go from 0 to 60, and as you can probably hear, there's definitely a decent amount of 4-cylinder engine noise coming into the cabin when that's happening. You will definitely notice that this engine is louder and gruffer sounding than pretty much any other minivan available in North America right now. And I kind of wish that Toyota had given us a bit more sound deadening. I really don't mind the 4-cylinder sound particularly, but it is awfully loud in this cabin, and a number of passengers did comment on it while I was driving this vehicle around. Now, on the flip side of that, of course, there is the fuel economy rating, which is the highest available in any minivan in North America right now. Thanks to the added power and the added torque that we find in the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, it will certainly go 0 to 60 faster than this, but it doesn't offer the all-wheel drive system that's available in the Sienna minivan. In terms of stopping distance, it took 135 feet for this vehicle to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That's pretty comparable with a number of electrified vehicles out there. This does have more eco-focused tires and skinnier tires than we find in some of the options that you might want to be comparing this against in terms of 3-row crossovers. And that's part of why handling ability is going to come in below some of the sportier options in the 3-row segment, but to be perfectly honest, compared to the average 3-row crossover, the Sienna does really quite well, and I'm still going to give this an A when it comes to handling. A lot of folks assume that minivans don't handle well, but the benefit to a minivan design like this is actually a very similar benefit to what we see in electric vehicles, where the center of gravity is much lower in this than it is in the average 3-row crossover. We have less ground clearance, we have a more car-like suspension in terms of the way that it's tuned and the way that it's designed, so the thing rides closer to the ground. All that really helps improve the handling ability. So even though this is not as grippy as I would like, this is definitely going to handle better than some 3-row crossovers that are on the market. And it's going to give you more of a car-like ride, car-like handling, which is definitely something that people might be interested in, while simultaneously giving you more of a, I guess, truck-like experience in terms of the seating position. I'm sitting very upright. The center console is quite wide because this minivan's cab is about as wide as a full-size pickup truck from just a few years ago. So this definitely has an upright seating position, a feeling of roominess that you'd expect in a truck with a really low load floor and a low center of gravity. Out on a rougher road like the one that I'm on here, the ride quality is pretty decent. It's very comparable to the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, and I would say that that is a little bit better than the average 3-row crossover in America. The tires in this vehicle have a little bit more sidewall than we find in some 3-row crossovers, and that helps give the suspension a little bit more cushion. The XSE is the slightly sportier version of the Sienna, so things have been tweaked here and there, not just with the styling, but also the way the suspension has been tuned just a little bit. It's not a very big difference. When it comes to cabin noise, at 50 miles an hour, I measured 73 decibels in here. That is a little bit louder than the last time I drove the Sienna, and I'm not entirely clear why. I suspect it may have to do with the tires on this vehicle. It's possible that at 4,000 miles, these have either more or less tread wear than the last time I drove the Sienna. I didn't really pay attention to how many miles were on that last model last time I drove one. Any way you slice it, this does appear to be a little bit louder than average in the minivan segment. And that's something that I noticed especially at higher speeds, say like 73 to 75 miles an hour in some of those higher speed limit zones. This definitely appears to be a little bit louder. The one thing that did not change versus the last time that I drove the Sienna hybrid is fuel economy. Over a week of mixed driving, I've been averaging about 30.5 mpg. That is a little bit below the EPA score, but still 50% better than you'll get in any non-hybrid minivan. So while I am a tiny bit disappointed that I didn't get 35, this is significantly better than anything else that will carry this kind of passenger capacity other than the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. Now, I do have to say that the Pacifica plug-in hybrid in real-world driving actually averaged a little bit above this. And I think that's mainly due to the fact that I drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, and its battery has the ability to keep regenerative braking all the way down the hill. This battery gets full pretty quickly. It's a relatively small battery. This is a pretty big minivan. This is over 4,000 pounds of minivan, and by the time you've added 7 passengers in here, we're talking well over 5,000 pounds of minivan. And the battery pack between these front seats, it's under 2 kilowatt hours in capacity. So it gets full relatively quickly, and on some of those longer downhill runs, there's nowhere for the energy to go. So instead, this vehicle has to use more traditional engine braking, which it controls using that dual motor transmission under the hood. Better engine braking when the battery is full is certainly something that Toyota has improved upon with this latest generation of their hybrid systems, and the transitions in between regenerative braking and friction braking have also become much smoother. In previous generations of Toyota's hybrid systems, if you're moderately braking and then you transition to a full application of the brake pedal quickly, there's this moment where nothing's going on, and it can be disconcerting. It still happens a little bit in some of Toyota's hybrids, but it is definitely better than before. But let's get back to fuel economy. If you want to get the EPA rating out of this vehicle, you really do have to target lower speeds. You have to try and keep your speed to below about 60 miles an hour in order to get up there into the high 30 mpgs on average. And you have to be pretty gentle in city traffic as well. If you're driving this, as I would say most people will, you're probably going to end up around 30 to 31 mpg. If you don't live in a hilly area like I do, you may get a few mpg better. But I would say that my RAV4 hybrid that we had as a long-term here at Alexson Autos for about 9 months, that vehicle did get its EPA rating even in my driving cycle. But logically, this is a much heavier vehicle with a very similar hybrid system, so you should expect this to have a decent amount less fuel economy. The relative efficiency or inefficiency, depending on how you want to look at it, of a modern minivan, the frontal profile, the need for a very square profile, etc., all of that is why it's taken us a while to see any manufacturer attempt an EV like this, but we are starting to see a number of them.
Price-wise, the Sienna slots right in the middle of the minivan segment. It starts at $34,710. That is more expensive than the Kia Carnival or the Honda Odyssey, but it is notably less expensive than the Chrysler Pacifica. That's mainly because the least expensive Chrysler minivan has suddenly become fleet only, so you can no longer buy the Voyager. You have to step yourself up into the Chrysler Pacifica, which is a few $1,000s more than the Toyota. And if you want the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, let's move on to that as our first competitor here. That's going to be quite a bit more expensive at $48,478, but you get the full federal tax credit. Now, why is it so much more expensive than the Sienna? That's easy to explain. It starts in a higher end trim. Touring L is the lowest trim you can get the plug-in hybrid in, and that is quite logically $7,500 more expensive than the non-hybrid model. So in reality, if you're taking a look at these minivans and you're looking at the Chrysler versus the Toyota minivan, you could get into the Chrysler hybrid for the same price as the non-hybrid Chrysler minivan as long as you qualified for the full federal tax credit. As far as being a minivan generally, I think the Chrysler comes across as a better minivan than the Sienna. Two big flaws with the Sienna have to do with the second row seats that do not come out of the vehicle. They simply collapse forward like we found in the last generation Kia minivan. In the Chrysler, they do come completely out of the vehicle. They don't fold flat into the floor if you get the hybrid version, but they do come out if you want to take them out. And that does make it a lot more cargo practical. Also, the second row seats I think are more comfortable in the Chrysler minivan if we're talking about the ones that stay in place, and the cargo area is a little bit more practical than the one that we find in the Sienna. We also have a little bit more third row headroom. Then of course there is the electrified drivetrain. If you're looking for something to offload some of your consumption from gasoline to electricity, if simply reducing your gasoline consumption is not enough and you want to go the next step to try and eliminate as much as possible, there's no plug-in hybrid version of the Highlander. As far as minivan practicality goes, I think the Chrysler beats the Sienna here. A big reason has to do with the second row seats that don't come out of the Sienna at all. They simply collapse forward, and that means the interior is not as cargo practical as the Pacifica. And generally speaking, minivans are more than just moving people around. They're also moving that mixture of cargo. It's that all-around family vehicle. It's, part pickup truck, part station wagon, and part minibus, to be perfectly honest. That's how a lot of families use their minivan. And in the Sienna, with the second row seats that don't come out, you lose some of that practicality. The cargo area is also a little bit less practical than the cargo area that we found in the Chrysler, and the third row not quite as generous either. If you don't have the ability to regularly plug your vehicle in, then the Sienna is going to be a better option. It's going to get you 5 to 6 miles per gallon better fuel economy than we find in the Pacifica, and you can get either all-wheel drive or an 8-passenger version of the Sienna depending on the trim levels that you're looking at. With the Pacifica hybrid, you can never get all-wheel drive, and there is no 8-passenger version, 7 passengers only. On the other hand, if you are able to plug your minivan in, especially if you live in a state like California where gas prices are pretty darn high right now, you will see a significant savings in the Chrysler Pacifica. You will also be able to go weeks and weeks and weeks without filling it at all. Depending on the national survey you're looking at, the average American drives somewhere between 15 and 30 miles a day. All of those people should be able to do their average daily commute in the Pacifica. If, however, you're, say, driving maybe 50 or 60 miles a day, then things will get a little bit interesting here, because the Pacifica could still be a little bit less expensive to operate until you get over about that 60 to 80 mile range, at which point then the Sienna is going to start being a little bit less expensive to operate because the fuel economy is higher. If, however, you get to charge at the office and you get to charge at home, then it's a no-brainer. Most people will be just fine in the Pacifica. As far as affordable three-row vehicles with decent fuel economy and a plug go, there aren't very many options in the US. The next one we have here is the Kia Sorento. Now, the Sorento is more Highlander-sized than Sienna-sized, so it's going to be considerably smaller on the inside. It is going to have a little bit more power because of the nature of its plug-in hybrid system. However, it has a 1.6-liter turbo and a plug, and it's not going to be that much more expensive. $45,190 plus, of course, the tax credit benefit that we get on that Kia. So real world price, it's actually going to be pretty close to the Sienna once you've actually started to factor in the cost of these things. All-wheel drive is standard on the Sorento. Some people will really be interested in that because it's a plug-in with all-wheel drive, and it has 32 miles of range. Unfortunately, it's not a minivan, so it doesn't seat as many people as the Sienna or the Pacifica, and the cargo area is going to be considerably smaller. So you are going to have to give up quite a bit. And in reality, you're going to have to give up quite a bit if you want anything with a plug to compete with what the Sienna is capable of, which is primarily 7 or 8 passenger seating. You could take a look at something like a Volvo XC90 or a Lincoln Aviator, or obviously the Tesla Model X. The Model X is the biggest three-row electric vehicle currently on sale in the US. Theoretically, at some point we should see the Rivian SUV, but sales are pretty delayed. If you want a three-row electric thing, it's going to be the Model X, the Model X, or the Model X for quite some time. The Model Y does have an optional third-row seat, but it's pretty darn small. Now, that Model X, keep in mind, it's going to be quite a bit more expensive. 3 times the price of a Sienna. It's going to start at $114,990 as of the date that I'm recording this video. And if you want the 7-seat option, that's $3,500 extra, and you're never going to get 8 seats in your Model X. You will, of course, go absolutely ludicrously fast in the Model X. That is definitely one of its core missions. All-wheel drive is standard. It has a lot of luxury features like the adaptive air suspension in there, and it has a very long range for a modern electric vehicle. 332 miles of range standard, although that does drop down to 329 if you want the 7-seat version. This is one of those situations where, in a perfect world, the Model X is the ideal vehicle. Obviously, it's going to be the most fuel efficient. It's going to be the lowest emissions at the tailpipe because it is pure electric, and it has a real-world, very, very usable range. It also has an ecosystem that makes it very easy to adapt into the average lifestyle. Tesla supercharger stations are everywhere. Tesla destination chargers are everywhere. The software is well worked out to charge the vehicle, whether we're talking about DC fast charging or AC charging, etc. The trouble is that it's 3 times the price of a Sienna. And that really is part of the problem when we're talking about a lot of mainstream vehicles and adopting lower emissions technologies onto mainstream vehicles. This is why I'm really happy that Toyota has done what they've done with the Sienna and made it 100% hybrid. Because outside of that, if you're looking at lowering your emissions profile a little bit further, we have the Pacifica hybrid, and then we have not a whole lot else until you spend an awful lot more. Now, if my money were on the line, I have to say I would probably get the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, because even on my daily commute, I would be cutting my gasoline consumption more than in half. It would drop to around 20 to 25% of what I would consume in a regular minivan for that same journey. And even comparing minivan to minivan, I would be consuming about half the gasoline that I would be consuming in a Toyota Sienna hybrid in the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid because of that ability to plug it in and start with that full battery. I'd be able to start at the office with a full battery, and I could probably logically plug it in at home, get a little bit of extra juice in there overnight, even though I do live off the grid and I don't have a lot of power available. But often there is that extra bump that I do have available, and I could make use of that in something like the Pacifica. Whether or not we'll ever see a Toyota Sienna plug-in hybrid, honestly, I don't know, because Toyota is running out of their EV tax credits. It's based on 200,000 units. Once you've sold over that, they start to sunset, and Toyota is rapidly approaching that 200,000 unit mark. Let me know, what would you pick down there in the comment section below? If you needed to move your family along and you wanted to make a greener choice, which of these options would you pick? Would you throw caution to the wind, get a second mortgage, get a Tesla Model X? Would you make do with probably the most reliable entry in this segment, which would be the Toyota Sienna? Or would you take a look at something that is smaller, maybe something like a Sorento plug-in hybrid, adapt your life to that, change your lifestyle, so that way you could live in a smaller vehicle and then make use of the 32 miles of range, the decent fuel economy once that system has been exhausted, and the smaller battery pack that smaller vehicle allows you to have for getting, basically the same range that we find in the Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. Be sure and sound off in the comment section below. Let me know what you would pick if your money was on the line and you were looking to make a greener choice, but you still needed to move, say, 6 or 7 people regularly. Would you be willing to try and adjust your lifestyle to make something like a Sorento plug-in hybrid work? Keep in mind, it doesn't seat as many people, and that is a big flaw with that vehicle if you're trying to compare it to a minivan. There's less cargo room, there's less rear seat room, there are fewer seats and seat belts going on the inside as well. Would you consider something like a Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid so you could move some of your emissions over to electricity, or would you stick to the most reliable entry in this segment quite logically, which is probably going to be the Toyota Sienna? Let me know all that down there in the comment section below, and of course stay tuned because there's going to be even more content coming up soon. I'll see all of you later.